Welcome to Physician Heal Thyself, the podcast, empowering you to take a whole person approach to your well-being, spirit, soul, and body. Join me, your host, Dr. Ana Lara, naturopathic doctor, entrepreneur, and a servant of Jesus Christ. We are not just a body, we are spirit and soul. It's time to integrate medicine and spirituality into our healing. Let's get started. Welcome back to Physician Heal Thyself, the podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Ana Lara. And today, I'm continuing kind of like a trend you might notice. And a lot of this is on like brain health, right? It's really related to the nervous system. So today, I want to talk about toxic love, inflamed minds, and how abusive relationships drive neuroinflammation and chronic disease. Look, I'm on a mission here. I see these cases way too much. And I feel like I'm in a position to give voice to the many men and women that experience these situations and that is showing up as illness, all because of the way of the relationships that they are in, that they've been in, the relationships that they're in with themselves, what they allow into their life, and how this is showing up as illness. And so, a lot of times people go to the doctor once they have the signs and symptoms. But really, that story started many years before they started having the fatigue and the brain fog, right? Maybe they have pain in their body and there's no physical injury that they've had. And so, I want to talk about that because if we don't shine light on these situations, then we keep making excuses and allowing these things to happen. And I know this is probably going to be a controversial topic for some people, especially those that are Christian. But I'm sorry, I just can't be quiet anymore. I am a naturopathic physician. I love Jesus just like you do. But I also know that God, our Creator, doesn't want His sons and daughters to be in relationships that are toxic, that are abusive, and that are harmful to them. And yes, we can pray, but please understand that there are some people that are in situations that they are not safe. They're not physically safe. They are mentally not safe. They're not spiritually safe in those spaces. So sometimes there does need to be a separation. So I just want to get that out of the way, that I am not against people having to separate and divorce when certain things are just too toxic and harmful. Because I see a lot of women, and I see this more in women, not because I see more women in my practice, I see a lot of men too. But I see that a lot of women, when they stay quiet about those abusive situations, right, that it starts to show up as autoimmune conditions like lupus and thyroid issues. They start to show up as cancer. And I am a doctor that believes in prevention. So if we can prevent women from having cancer, if we can prevent women from developing autoimmune conditions or other medical conditions, mental health issues, then I think we should start addressing the elephant in the room. And the same goes for men. There are men that I have seen that have led them to a deep state of disease, ending up having heart attacks and so forth, not because they had a medical condition before, not because they're not taking care of themselves, but because of the relationships that have been abusive in some sort of way. So this is going to be one of those, like I said, topics that I know we are not all going to see eye to eye, but please listen to me. Just hear me out, Take the best, leave the rest. If you have better ideas and suggestions, share them. I'm open to that. But I want to talk about how abusive and toxic relationships, and this could also be other family members or even work situations, how these situations can literally inflame our brains, right, and our body, and this sets the stage for chronic disease. So It's not just psychological. It's not just emotional pain. This is biology we're talking about today, okay? So let's get started. This first segment, I want to talk about what is toxic or abusive relationships. So before we go into the science, let's go ahead and define what we're talking about. What is a toxic relationship? Well, that can include emotional manipulation and gaslighting. You know, what happens in these situations is that the person tries to, they first love bomb you, and then they start to distort your sense of reality, and they make you feel like you're crazy. So there's chronic, it could be chronic criticism and belittling you. Look, once in a relationship, especially a romantic relationship, once your partner starts calling you names that he shouldn't or she shouldn't be calling you, that's a red flag, you know, because when you lose respect in a relationship, it's just going to set up the stage for greater offenses later down. If your partner's calling you stupid, putting you down, you're ugly, no one loves you, that is abusive. It's not going to get any better. Let's just be real. People start to show you their character really early on. It's just that sometimes we don't pay attention because you're in this bubble of love. And so you have to see, how do they not just treat you, how are they treating other people? When you go out, how do they treat their parents, their mother, their father, their siblings, their friends? How do they communicate? Don't let those things pass so easily. Let that start to show you their character. So once they start to show you that consistently this is how they behave, right? And there's that pattern there. Believe that pattern is going to show up for you as well. So we want to talk also, the other thing is, if you feel like you lack safety in the relationship, whether it's physically you don't feel safe or emotionally you don't feel safe, and listen, or if you don't feel like this person really listens to you or cares about you, isn't listening, you're not going to be safe in the relationship. Look, there's two vital things that we all as humans desire and need in this life, and that is to be seen and to be heard. If you're not seen, you're not acknowledged, and you're not heard, then what are you? A wall? What are you? If you're not being acknowledged in that relationship and being given the time and attention that you need, obviously without being super needy, right? I mean, there are some people that are really needy, and that's a topic for another time because that needs to be healed also. But just they're never really engaged with you intellectually, you're not going to feel safe. Obviously, there's physical abuse, that's toxic. But verbal abuse, right? Psychological abuse. These relationships are going to do something to your nervous system. It's going to set your nervous system to constantly be in a state of threat detection. And it even goes as far as if your partner is someone who is a very, very deep avoidant. They're always avoiding situations, and when you do confront them about something, even if it's friendly, they just lose their temperament, right? Like a volcano erupting in your face, they just lose that. What happens eventually is that you learn to silence yourself and be quiet. And it's that silencing your own voice and staying quiet that your nervous system realizes, I am walking on eggshells. I don't know when this person is going to lose their temperament and is going to take it out on me. So then you start to silence yourself. And listen, when we start to silence our voice, and we don't express our needs, our desires, our wants, right? Assuming that we're being reasonable. And when we don't express ourselves, that really starts to shut our voice. Our voice affects our thyroid and our nervous system, and then we go internal. We go deep inside and we internalize all of these things. And those emotions that are not expressed, those thoughts that were never expressed, they start to create imbalance, disease, right? The word disease is without ease, dysfunction without proper function. And then here we are. If you find yourself feeling fatigued, having brain fog, having digestive issues, Sometimes things show up on our skin, our eyes. It creates nutrient deficiencies because your biology is utilizing all these nutrients super fast because you're constantly under stress, and maybe your nervous system has already adapted and now you're just numb, right? You don't even feel the stress, but it doesn't mean it's not happening. Those are all toxic relationships. When you walk into a room and that person is there and you just get this icky feeling, like you just feel ill all of a sudden, like you got hit in the stomach, that's a sign. That is a sign that that person is not healthy for you. But what we do is we psychologically, come up with all these stories and all of these justifications, right? We try to justify why we feel that way, excuse them. I'm not a good Christian. I'm being judgmental. I shouldn't do that. And maybe it's your God-given nervous system that's alerting you that your spirit and your soul is saying, red alert, this person we don't like. We don't understand why, so we don't judge it and criticize it, but we do have to acknowledge. We have to acknowledge our feelings, our thoughts, our emotions in that moment and saying, okay, God, what is going on here? And the faster that you do this, you'll develop a really sensitive nervous system and discernment, right? To be able to see what's safe, what's not safe. Is this person safe for me? They're not safe for me. If they're not safe for me, what do I need to do? Is this a situation that I stay and confront it and have a conversation? Or is this a situation that I need to excuse myself and get out of there? But don't stay frozen in a situation where someone is verbally or psychologically being abusive and controlling and manipulating. So let's talk about the neurobiology of toxic stress. I've talked about this a lot in other episodes, but I'm going to talk about it here because it relates specifically to these abusive and toxic relationships. And the purpose of this podcast is to bring education and awareness on spiritual matters, physical, mental, emotional, right, psychological matters, and how our emotions and how our relationships are going to impact our health. And so when we look at the neurobiology, when you're in a toxic relationship, your brain is going to perceive ongoing danger. So now this danger, it's unpredictable, but you're assuming it's there. If I walk into my home, is he going to be angry? Is she going to be angry? What is the emotional state this volatile person is going to be in? And so this is going to activate that HPA axis, right? Which is the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal system. It's our brain and our adrenal glands that are connected there. And so this cascade, the amygdala is going to detect the threat, right? The amygdala is the place of the brain that we perceive emotions, pain, and it perceives threat. This is where we respond. If something is a threat, what we need to do. The hypothalamus is going to signal the pituitary, and then the pituitary is going to trigger the adrenal glands, and the adrenal glands are going to pump out cortisol, and adrenaline is going to be released. And when cortisol and adrenaline are constantly being released throughout your day and consistently every day, these are going to impact your brain. Understand that cortisol and adrenaline, that it impacts the prefrontal cortex, which is the front part lobe of our brain. And this is the part of our brain that rationalizes, makes decisions, analyzes things, right? And so we can't think straight. That's why women and men that are in traumatic situations, abusive relationships, they're always like a brain fog. And you know what happens when people leave these toxic and abusive relationships? They still have that brain fog. And they feel like they're almost like numb. They'll say they feel like a zombie. It's because they don't feel safe. Now they have a new norm, right? And so cortisol and adrenaline is not only going to impact causing the brain, causing neuroinflammation, right? Causing degeneration of the nervous system of the brain, but it's going to affect your digestive system. So you're going to have gut issues. It can cause pain in your body, joint pain, muscle pain. It can make you gain weight. It's going to affect all of your other hormones. So if you're like, my period is irregular, I never get my period and it's late, and yeah, check in with your stress response. It's that cortisol stealing from the other hormones, especially pregnenolone. And for women, pregnenolone is what keeps us calm. It's what keeps us, cool, calm, and collective is what I say. So if cortisol is too high, it starts to take away from progesterone and pregnenolone. And so then you're deficient in that, and it throws everything off. And if your hormones, if you're young, 20, 30, 40 years old, and your hormones are not in balance this whole time in your life, do you think it could potentially cause autoimmune conditions? Your nervous system starts to alert to your immune system. There's a threat. There's a threat. And we got to fight. But your nervous system doesn't know that. Who are you fighting? Or we got to run. Who are you running from? Who are you running and who are you trying to fight? Because it's not a pathogen. It's an external force, a perceived force, an external perceived force that you sense there's a danger. And then what happens is you adapt. Our brains are so magical. They just adapt to whatever you expose it to, good or bad. It's very adaptable. And so that's the neuroplasticity of our brain, right? You give it bad stuff, it will adapt to the bad stuff. And let me tell you, it is so easy to acquire bad habits versus trying to change those bad habits and acquire new ones. But the same way that we acquire bad habits, we acquire good habits. And so we just need to be consciously aware of what are those habits, make a conscious and intentional decision, and put action behind that to change the behavior. But let me tell you, if you live with a person that is super abusive and angry, it's going to make it very difficult for you to work on yourself and heal. And this is why I'm not trying to separate people. I don't want you to go run off and get a divorce attorney. Not today. I just want you to listen about, is this you? Because if your nervous system is constantly thinking you're under threat and you need to run or you need to fight or you're frozen, right? That's not a way to live. That is not the peace of the Lord. I'll tell you that. And that is not what God wants for us in our life. And so these responses are meant to be short term, so that if I go outside of this building and there's someone who comes and tries to attack me physically, my nervous system's going to respond and I'm going to go into fight mode. I already know I'm a fighter. I'm going to go into fight mode. And so all of those biological processes are happening. And then when the threat is gone, I might need some time for the cortisol and adrenaline to get out of my system. But then once it's gone, I'm going to be like, thank God I'm safe, right? And I was able to get out of that threatening situation, and I can go home now. That's what a healthy nervous system does. Now, sometimes the people who experience threats like that, they stay stuck in that trauma response, right? And then they develop PTSD, and then they're hypervigilant, watching their back, not able to sleep. And so you might not be physically attacked in your situation, but if they're verbally abusive to you, emotionally neglectful, they're absent, and there's no way to get across to that person, it makes it very difficult to live. That's not a way to live. So we need to be able to communicate with individuals to create change within ourselves for them, or it's time to move on. And this could be also work situations. Do you know that aside from relationship stress, a very big, huge stressor for a lot of people is work stress? You work with a boss that isn't the best person to work with, or you have that annoying, coworker that just doesn't shut up or is just annoying to you. I mean, we're humans. Let's just be real. These things happen. And so how do we navigate those situations, right? Let's talk about how we can move from how stress moves into becoming that neuroinflammation. I already talked a little bit about it, how chronic stress. And chronic stress, let's define it. Because chronic stress is you're having stress most of your day. If you're stressed more than 50, 60% of your day, and you're having the stress every day, then you have chronic stress. And I have seen people that 80, 90% of their day, they're stressed. They can't even sleep at night. Sleeping is a stressor to them. They develop anxiety around not being able to fall asleep. So now that's not good. And so that's what chronic stress is. It's not just a temporary time in my life that I'm having stress. And there could be multiple stressors in your life too. If it's work, it's relationship, it's your health, it's finances, your self-esteem, whatever. All of these stressors, right? Parents, illness of family members, loved ones dying, all of that is going to contribute to this. So this chronic stress leads to the persistent cortisol that's elevated, dysregulation of your immune system signaling. Look, our immune system starts to take a hit from the chronic stress, because remember that it is our nervous system that is alerting the immune system when it needs to activate and fight a pathogen if it's there, or what it needs to do to modulate, the body. So if your body, your nervous system is always signaling to your immune system, this is where we start to develop autoimmune conditions and can lead to cancer. So chronic stress is gonna activate the microglia, which are immune cells in your brain. And this microglia is really important for our brain health. So your immune system starts to attack those cells in your brain, and it starts to impact your brain function. So very important. Now this microglia is going to, when it's activated, it's going to release pro-inflammatory cytokines like interleukin 6, interleukin 1 beta, TNF alpha. Probably doesn't mean much to you, but just know that these are the specific cytokines that the immune system is going to be activating, right, in your brain. And it is those markers that create that neuroinflammation. So sometimes people who have neuroinflammation due to toxic and abusive relationships, it's almost like experiencing a concussion. It's just you've not had a physical injury. Now, it's sad for me to say this, but I've had women tell me they have all of these neurological symptoms. And when we go deep into their life, into their story, and they start to share the times that maybe their spouse or ex-spouse or a boyfriend in the past, someone rammed them against a wall, put their head through the wall. Now, do you think this woman doesn't have trauma? Physical, emotional, spiritual, psychological trauma. I'm done. I'm sorry. I will not tell this woman, you have to make your marriage work. I'm not that doctor. And I've always kept my mouth shut until the Lord made me speak up and tell a woman who was in a dangerous situation and her children were witnessing and being part of this physical abuse, psychological abuse, emotional abuse. I told, get out. Get out. You're not safe. These children are not safe. Get out. Find the way, reach a family member, do it today. You're not leaving my office until you call them, or I will call, because I will call the police because these children are not safe there. And so I am a physician that can report when children are not safe at home. And I never want to have to do that because I understand the complications that it can cause. And I know this mother's a loving mother, faithful, loving, gentle Christian woman. Now, it would be wrong for me to just tell her, go pray about it and talk to your pastor. No, Get out. And I'll tell you, many years went by and I'm still in contact with this individual. And her health and the health of her children are much better because one of the children was developing signs of autoimmune disease. 7-year-old. The hospital, the children's hospital could not figure out what was going on with this child. And when I looked at this child and I started doing cranial sacral therapy on her and all of these emotions were coming out, she wasn't crying, but I could feel them. And then she just gets up all joyful and happy and just leaves, where before she walked in just tormented. And I had the little girl leave to the waiting room with her siblings, and I talked to the mom. I'm like, what's going on at home? And that's when she felt safe and comfortable to talk to me and tell me what's going on. And she tells me all the abuse. These situations are not okay, period. And so I understand what those situations are going to cause illness in people. I could have given this little girl and her mom all the great herbs and homeopathic remedies, all of those things. And I know what some of you are thinking, like, you crossed the boundaries. That was not for you to, then who is it? Whose job is it to speak life into someone who is physically in danger? You know that the greatest sin that we can commit is that good people just stand by on the sidelines and see people suffer and do nothing about it. Whatever, I know God and I know my Creator. I know who He designed me to be. And I know the mantle and the position that He's given me as a physician, as a leader, as someone who's a teacher to others, to who I want to uplift. I want to uplift them. I want to help them with their physical health, mental health, emotional health, their spiritual health, all of it. Because I see this constantly. When people heal from those things, they go on to do great things. They sometimes change careers. They go back to school. They start a business. They start living their life very differently. They start showing up to in relationships with their children and other people. They show up different in the world. I want to create a world where people are healed and happy, right? We cannot just turn a blind eye to. That's a wound. That is a wound, you know. And there's not a lab test and medication or herb that can heal these kinds of things, right? So sorry I went off the script, but I just feel very passionate about these things. And like I said earlier in the beginning of the episode, it's not just women. No. Men experience this too. They are in abusive. Sometimes it's physical. They won't fight back because they understand that they might be at more, they may be held legally more, right, if they were to physically defend themselves. But the psychological and emotional abuse and manipulation that men have experienced through some women is wicked. And, sometimes putting children in the middle of those relationships, it's evil. So they experience this same HPA axis where their bodies are pumping tons of cortisol and adrenaline, and it's dysregulating their nervous system. So let's talk about the next is how these experiences, this path, is going to lead to chronic disease. I already talked about it, right? The stress response, the cortisol, and the adrenaline affecting neurotransmitters, hormones, having an impact on the immune system by creating those pro-inflammatory cytokines. And then over time, this inflammatory state is going to contribute to insulin resistance, to cardiovascular disease, that's heart attacks and strokes, right? Autoimmune conditions like lupus and even aggravate rheumatoid arthritis. So this young girl that I mentioned, they had diagnosed her, air quotes, they had diagnosed her with juvenile rheumatoid arthritis, even though the lab work that they did was negative. It wasn't positive for it. But because of the pattern, it was a migratory inflammation. One joint would inflame, and then it would move to another, and it just kept migrating throughout her body. And I mean, you could visually see how swollen her joints would get, and it was really painful. And she had a lot of pain mostly in her lower body. And she never, after what we did with her, I did put her on some nerves, more for her nervous system, and did the cranial. She all of it resolved. It was all emotions. And so it can develop like autoimmune conditions, Hashimoto's, Graves' disease, things like that. Obviously, chronic fatigue is going to be part of that picture, but depression and anxiety, sometimes we think, oh, I have depression, let me get the medication, I'm fine. But we still have to treat the root cause. What is it? Is it a toxic work relationship that you're in? Do you need to change employers? Like, what is it? And of course, this is going to cause neurodegeneration. So the longer you stay in this toxic and abusive relationship, women, listen. Because then you go through menopause and you feel like you're falling apart, and you are. Your hormones are not there. Your brain is out the door. And maybe it's not the menopause. Maybe it's all the unresolved trauma, all the unresolved abusive situations that you were in. It's maybe all the unsaid things, right? That you wanted to say, but you just got tired, you gave up, and you started silencing yourself. And now your nervous system is acting a fool. And it's causing neurodegeneration. And you feel like you have memory loss, Alzheimer's. It might be your hormones, but even when we fix your hormones, if they're still you're not healing, you're not functioning neurologically well, then we got to look at the trauma. We got to look at the relationships. There's no way that we can tippy-toe our way out of that situation. And so why do these inflammatory situations happen, these conditions? Well, because that chronic inflammation, it's damaging blood vessels, which is very important. That's the freeway for the blood to transport all the wonderful nutrients to one part of the body, communicating factors of hormones and neurotransmitters, all happening through the blood vessels. So if these blood vessels are damaged, it's like driving on a freeway with a bunch of potholes. It disrupts our mitochondrial function. So remember, mitochondria are cells that produce energy, and they're in our muscles. There's hundreds in a muscle, there's thousands in our heart, and there's billions of mitochondrial cells in our central nervous system. That's our brain, our spinal cord, billions of them. So when the nervous system's always revved up, even though you feel calm, you present your calm. Let me tell you how many people I have in my clinic that come in and they're cool as a cucumber. They look so peaceful and chill. But once I start talking to them, once they start sharing, they tell me all the time they have tons of anxiety and panic. They're constantly overthinking. They're always worrying. They have all this stress. And you can't judge a book by its cover. You look at them and they look calm. But inside there's a storm that's raging, destroying things silently without no one ever even batting an eye and noticing it. I notice it. I notice all the little things in people. I might not tell them, but I notice them. I notice if their eyes are twitching. I notice if there's something facial going on. Maybe the way they walk, maybe the way they sit, the way they're speaking to me, the eye contact, their voice, everything is telling me it's part of their story. And so the only way I know is to be in tune with the person and listen. And so this chronic inflammation is going to alter our gut microbiome. So how are we digesting food, absorbing food, right? Utilizing the vitamins and nutrients. Because that's going to impact our brain health, causing neuroinflammation, causing for depression, anxiety to happen, for memory, right? The cognitive function to decline. Because the gut microbiome, it matters. It starts to weaken our immune regulation. So it's either, the immune system starts to either be too low functioning, or it's too hyper functioning. And when the immune system's overly operating, you're going to see that people start to develop histamine reactions, So they become sensitive and have allergic reactions, a lot of skin conditions like psoriasis and eczema and other skin rashes. It'll start to show up acne. Acne is not just because of your diet, it's because of your stress response too, right? So in essence, your body starts to begin to break down under the weight of all of these unresolved relational stressors. And we're not even talking about what is a person's diet, what is their sleep, have they been exposed to heavy metals and other toxins? Because if you got all of that mess going on top of relationship stress, it's going to affect the terrain, right? It's going to affect the physical structures. Let's talk about the psychological process of being in these toxic, abusive relationships and how it impacts our brain and causes neuroinflammation. These toxic relationships are not just going to affect the physical body, right? They shape our mind. So some of these common psychological patterns are going to include trauma bonding, learned helplessness. It's almost like feeling like a victim, like I give up. You internally just give up because what's the purpose of trying to argue or create a change if you just feel hopeless, like you can't? And you feel stuck, like I'm just stuck in this situation. I'm stuck at this job. I'm stuck in this marriage. I'm stuck in this living situation. I just can't get out of it. And some of you, it's your parents. Even you're an adult. Your parents haven't grown up. They're still acting immature. And you're still the child having to deal with their immaturity. And sometimes we do have to put boundaries on those relationships. I'm talking about real extreme situations here, right? Because some people they create a big problem out of nothing. I'm talking about real abusive, toxic relationships, cognitive dissonance. You start a pattern of cognitive dissonance, meaning you start to separate yourself from the problem. Like, I'm just going to, almost like an avoidance. So, they hurt me. You start to tell yourself they hurt me, but they love me. But they love me. He does these things for me. She does these things for me. He does love me. Sometimes it's, but he doesn't hit me and he's not abusive to me, but maybe there's just neglect, right? And emotional, psychological neglect, it's a form of abuse, especially if it's gone on for too long. I get it that we all go through seasons in our life, right? We all go through them, but you can't stay stuck there. And if this person's just neglecting the relationship, then you're not being seen, you're not being heard, right? You can start to develop this pattern of loss of identity, like, who am I? I hear this a lot when people do get separated, they go through a divorce, like, I don't even know who I am. I don't know what I like. It's like being born again. They're having to learn who they are, what they like, what they don't like, create a new vision for themselves. And of course, other patterns, psychological patterns that people will develop is this hypervigilance. So you're always on the edge. You're never in peace, at ease. You always feel like there's something bad going to happen. And almost like you deserve for something bad to be happening to you. That's what the psychology sometimes is going through some people. And there's so many more patterns, right? Sometimes you develop a psychological pattern of becoming an avoidant. You just avoid all the things that overwhelm you and stress you. Sometimes there's psychological behavioral patterns that you develop of you being a procrastinator. Like, you just can't seem to ever get caught up because your brain is inflamed. It cannot process. Your prefrontal cortex, it's shut down. It's not functioning with clarity, right? So then the brain becomes wired for this anticipated harm. You're anticipating these interactions, right, with this person or individuals, and you start to minimize your self-worth. You start to shrink yourself, make yourself small. Stop speaking, not your voice doesn't matter. And you start seeking for safety sometimes in unsafe people or unsafe substances, or situations. So you may be turning to food. You might be turning to something else that's highly addictive and not good for you. So this is going to reinforce that stress cycle, right? It's just a vicious cycle. And of course, when we talk about the emotional experience, so we have the physical, right? The disease part of it, the psychological, and then the emotional experience. Emotionally, people in these situations, right, in these relationships, are going to often experience that chronic anxiety. They're going to feel shame, confused, emotional numbness, grief for what could have been, right? Because people start to go through this, like, what if I didn't make this decision? Where could I have been? And that already tells you a lot. And sometimes you start to blame yourself. I should have done that. I shouldn't have done this. And then you start to blame yourself. And that just, you know what? You just create a bigger fire for yourself. And this is why people feel trapped. This emotional suppression just further fuels more inflammation, because those emotions are still tapping into your nervous system, that HPA axis, and creating that cortisol and creating that adrenaline until you're tapped out, and then you don't have any of that. Then you're really fatigued. So why does that happen? Why does the emotional suppression further fuel this inflammation? It's because the unprocessed emotion keeps the nervous system activated. That amygdala that we talked about, that's in the center of our brain, that amygdala, it's almost like an almond-shaped gland. That amygdala is the perception of emotions and pain. And when you're in your emotions of shame and confusion, sadness and grief or anger, unexpressed, right? You're not processing through any of that. You're feeling, you're stuck in those feelings. That part of your brain is activating our pain perception. I mean, fibromyalgia, come on. It's hugely linked. I don't even need to look at the research and the articles. It's great, but I see it clinically all the time. Someone with true fibromyalgia, all the chronic inflammatory markers, imaging, all of the tests look normal. It is a diagnosis of exclusion, meaning that in order for you to be properly diagnosed with fibromyalgia, the physician needs to do a thorough blood tests for inflammatory and all other autoimmune conditions that can be contributing to that pain, do imaging of the parts of your body that have pain. And if all of those things say they all look normal, then we should be asking, tell me about your life. What traumas, what are the stressors, big stressors that you've gone through your life? Tell me about that. And that's where it's going to be revealed, the traumas, and when did this pattern of pain start to happen. It's almost consistently like after these things happen, I started to have back pain and shoulder pain and my head hurt and all these things hurt. And so that's why, because these emotions are not processed. They stay stuck in the body. And so we need help to process all of that. But you need to get out of, if you are still in that toxic, abusive situation, you cannot heal in the place that you were wounded. You hear me? You cannot heal staying in the same place, in the same situation, in the same relationship where you are being wounded. It doesn't work that way. And so we need to make some hard decisions, right? Yeah. And so there's a planning process for that. And I'm going to go into this. But the spiritual impact, let's go a little bit deeper, because the spiritual impact, because it does impact us. You know, these toxic relationships are going to start to fracture parts of our soul. And so we start to then question our meaning of life. Can I trust anyone? Can I even trust God? Why is God, people always say, why is God allowing this? Maybe it's my punishment. You know, you start to be disconnected from God, because it starts to not just affect you mentally, emotionally, physically, spiritually, it starts to affect your soul. And so then you can be disconnected from God, from hearing from God. Because if we could hear him, I'm pretty sure he'd be like, girl, run. Sir, get out of that situation. Son, move, do something. You know, But people may feel disconnected from themselves, right? If you don't feel connected to yourself, you're not going to feel connected to God. You're not going to feel connected to your children or other people. It's going to be a struggle. And so then you feel spiritually lost. You feel unworthy of being loved. You don't feel loved. You don't feel seen. You don't feel heard. And this part of us, our soul, just needs to be nourished as well. So at a spiritual level, this is a loss of alignment with truth, with what's good for us. So this alignment not just happens physically and psychologically, but this disalignment happens spiritually too. And so healing is going to require reclaiming your inner voice and leaning in with God to help you, guide you through these circumstances, situations, right? So what can you do? Let's move into what are some things you can do. This is not by any means the final say in authority. It's just some ideas that you can take and learn from. I encourage you to seek help, whether it's a pastor, someone that you can really trust, a friend, a family member that you can trust to have this conversation for guidance. Maybe you don't even have the clarity to think about who to go to, where do I go to for help, and you feel trapped. And that's usually the way the enemy works, is he will make you think that there's no one out there that wants to help you or can help you. So you're stuck and you just have to suck it up and deal with it. And that's a lie. So here's some things. First of all, is you have to recognize yourself in this experience, in this process, in this relationship. What is going on? You have to acknowledge things. And so here are some steps that you can take. First is to name the reality of your situation. Just be real. Call it out, because clarity is healing. And in order for you to heal, you need clarity. So name the reality. Stop minimizing. Stop rationalizing this harmful behavior. Stop justifying the harmful behavior. Talk to someone else that you haven't shared this with, and I guarantee you they're going to shine light on you, and they're going to hopefully be someone that can guide you in a direction of where to go to. But start naming the reality. Stop minimizing how serious this harmful situation is. The next step is, and obviously you wanna take some proactive steps in going to the right people, but you're gonna have to regulate your nervous system. And so whether it's prayer, meditation, breath work, seeing a therapist, right? Someone that can help you regulate your nervous system. Change your diet. If your diet is super a high inflammatory diet with a lot of sugar and processed foods, start cutting that out. Really find the discipline to make yourself do that, because once some of that inflammation comes down, you'll be able to see with more clarity, right? And that's going to help reduce that inflammatory signaling. So the third step is you want to rebuild some internal safety. So safety is going to be created within before you can go find out external help. And I'm telling you, because I've seen people in these situations that they are really stuck, and you need to tell someone, and that someone needs to be able to be a person who is able to either help you or direct you to someone who can help you, right? And so that is going to consist of that fourth step of seeking support. So get into a good trauma-informed therapist that can help you, because they will also help you. Sometimes people have to be strategic with this. If it is in a marriage, in a living situation with someone, this therapist can help you, especially if they're trauma-informed with these cases. They will create a plan for your strategy to timing things and what you need to do first for you to be safe, financially for you to be able to make this move. If they're giving you legal support, whatever you need to do, this person will help you to come up with a strategy, an exit strategy from that unhealthy situation, right? There's plenty of support groups. A lot of churches have support groups for this. Find a good church, find a support group. And there's some that are also outside of the church, that maybe a one of these trauma-informed therapists can, lead you to. There's a lot of free resources for, unfortunately, more for women than for men. But there are a lot of, resources out there to support people who are leaving abusive situations. Of course, trusted individuals, you're not meant to do this alone, and you're going to need some help. So identify who are those people that will trust you, believe you, and help you in that process, right? Not just hear your story and spread rumors. That's not what this is about. And then how do you safely end that relationship? This is something that the trauma-informed therapist would really help you more, right? Because you need to do a safety assessment if there's any risk of harm, right? If you leave unannounced, so do not announce your plan prematurely. Talk to the professional first. Seek the professional guidance before you make any moves. And if you don't think that there's a physical safety issue, then, you can make those moves. But create a plan, prepare financially, house arrangements, find a supporting network. If you have children involved, who can help you with your children. And then start setting some boundaries. In the process of you healing and working with the therapist, this is going to be part of setting boundaries and take the time to heal, especially if it's a romantic relationship. Take the time to heal before you go jump into a new relationship. And even work situations. I've known people who've worked in very toxic, abusive work environments, and they had a really strong trauma response. It's then still identifying what are some things that you're not willing to budge in a work environment. What are some things that must happen in the work environment for you to feel safe and still have to go through that healing process. And then, of course, when you leave a relationship, a marriage, partnership, there's always going to be some toxicity in that withdrawal and that separation. So just understand that you're also going to have to adapt to a new norm. And you have to be patient with yourself and give yourself grace that this is normal and this too shall pass. Prioritize your healing after you leave this toxic relationship, because now that you're outside of that environment that was harmful to you, now the nervous system can be recalibrated. Now you can do all the healing things, the herbs and the exercising and good sleep and good diet, and really now start pouring into yourself. It's not selfish to take care of you, right? So look, these toxic relationships are not just emotionally painful. There is a biological destruction. And I've seen that even when people, years of being separated from that spouse, they are still dealing with neuroinflammation. So there's still some cognitive decline, brain fog, memory, concentration issues, and healing, it takes time, but you need to find the right people, right, that can align with you. So just know that healing relationships are going to start with the one that you have with yourself first and foremost. And then you can reverse the inflammation. Then you can restore balance and rebuild health. But start feeding into your spiritual person first to bring alignment into the other areas of who we are. So your body's not broken, stop the shame and blaming yourself, the shame, the fear, the guilt, all of that. We need to pray against those things as well. So I hope that this conversation has shined some light to you, that if you are in this situation, you're not crazy and you're not alone. And all of those physical symptoms, it is because of that toxic relationship. And so this person is either going to start listening to you, start changing, and be consistent with their change in their behavior, in their approach with you, or you're going to have to make a decision. It's survival at this point that you're going to need to recalibrate. Now, what if you are in multiple situations that are toxic, whether it's work, parents, romantic relationship that's toxic? Pick the one that's most harmful to you and start there. But I really ask that you seek professional help to get that guidance, right? And someone who could pray for you would be amazing. So I hope that, I want to thank you for joining me on this episode of Physician Heal Thyself as we talk about something that's so sensitive and fragile on toxic and abusive relationships and how it causes neuroinflammation. I pray that you, if you or you know someone who's in these situations, that you get the help you need. Please share this episode with someone who you think it can really bring a blessing to them and bring new knowledge, new awareness, bring them hope. And so until next time, be blessed. Thank you for listening to Physician Heal Thyself, the podcast. If you like what you've heard, please like, share, and subscribe. Help this message reach more people who may need to hear it. Leave your comments. I want to know what you think. If you're interested in learning more about Raices, visit our website at raicesndmedcenter.com. Until next time, be blessed.